And now it is my honor to introduce Lynne Twist. As I mentioned last night, she's been an SVN member for over 20 years. She is the co-founder of the Pachamama Alliance. She's the co-founder of 4 Years Go. She's the president of the Soul of Money Institute. She has been a global activist working in countries all over the world. She worked for the Hunger Project for 25 years. She works side by side with Mother Teresa. She's just an amazing leader and just one of the kindest, most generous people you will ever meet. Please join me in welcoming Lynne Twist. Oh, she's right there.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It was quite a wonderful party last night. I think I'll stay down here because everybody's over there. If I'm up there, I'm too far away. So this morning I'm going to talk about taking a stand, sort of in terms of my own journey. And I always cry a little bit, so I'll start there. The SVN community, even though I haven't been here a long time, at UN, has been so important to my development as an activist, as a fundraiser, as a global activist, as a founder of many different things. And I want to do this morning session in a way that affirms and validates this incredible community of people and the nourishment and the ecosystem that it is for people like me. And I think because we're people who live what I call a committed life, that is a life that's not governed by what you want or what you need, but what you stand for. That kind of a life is a life worth living that generates opportunities and openings and activities and relationships that you couldn't plan. I couldn't have planned to work with Mother Teresa. If I had set that as a goal, a lifelong goal, it was a thing that happened because I took a stand for ending world hunger, found myself in India, found myself working in a field that brought me right to her doorstep and was able to be at her side. I couldn't have planned that, but because of what I took a stand for, it guided me there. I couldn't have planned to be in South Africa the final day of apartheid and attend the inauguration of Nelson Mandela. I couldn't have planned that, but I was there and I did have that amazing experience because of what I stood for in my work with the Hunger Project in eradicating hunger and poverty. I don't know why I'm going to cry through this whole thing. So if you cry too, please join me. It's very affirming when other people are crying too. I'm just going to use a napkin here. Okay. So I couldn't have planned to end up working in the Amazon with indigenous people. I mean, I wasn't even thinking about them. I wasn't even, the Amazon, South America wasn't even on my screen. The Hunger Project didn't work there. The Hunger Project was where I did a lot of my work. In Sub-Saharan Africa, India, Bangladesh, I was responsible for operations in 47 countries. They were all in Asia and Africa, and then fundraising operations in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, all over Europe. South America just wasn't, it was kind of like over here. And yet, because of SVN, actually, in many ways, I was introduced to Bob Graham, who many of you know, who introduced me to John Perkins, who many of you know, who then took me under his wing and educated me about the Amazon and shamanism and indigenous people, and said, this needs to be part of your deal here. And I said, I can't. I'm ending world hunger. It's a big to-do. I haven't checked it off. I can't do the Amazon. You do that. Other people need to worry about that. He said, no. You're gonna get involved in this, and I know you are. And then he kind of kidnapped me, as he has many people. Now I kidnap people myself. And we went to Guatemala to lead a trip for Bob Graham's organization, Catalysis, which many of you may know. Bob wanted me to train his development director. And so John Perkins and I led this trip to Guatemala. And on this trip to Guatemala, a miracle occurred. This was in 1994. And Jim Gollin was on that trip and other SVNers. And it was a donor immersion trip, which is something that I know how to do to empower donors to really understand what they're funding and get more deeply immersed in the power of it so that they ask themselves for money for the rest of their life rather than you have to ask them, you know what I mean? If you're a fundraiser, that's a nice feature. And so we're in Guatemala. I'm leading a trip with 44 quite wealthy people who had a lot of needs, didn't like their seat on the bus, weren't so sure about their pillow. You know, they were kind of a pain, frankly. And at one point in the journey, John Perkins said, I don't think anybody here was there. If you were, I apologize. It wasn't you. John Perkins said, there's a shaman working with these Mayan people that we're visiting, and I can tell they're not telling us that. I can tell they're guided not only by the leadership of this organization, there's a shaman working with them too. Let's find out who it is, let's go see him. So John, who is a shaman himself, has been trained in shamanism, worked in the Ecuadorian Amazon in the Peace Corps, was saved, his life was saved by a shaman, and is a very interesting fellow. A lot of you know him. He and I went to see a man named Roberto Pose, who was the local shaman, who wouldn't see us because we were white people and we were Americans. And at that time in Guatemala, the CIA had done some really nasty stuff, and Americans were really not trusted, particularly by indigenous people. But John put his wakas and his mesa and all his magic stones and stuff outside the door of the shaman, and suddenly the door opened and we were able to talk to him. And we invited him to meet with our donors because they were funding this great work that he was kind of overseeing shamanically. And he's once again said, I don't work with white people and I don't work with Americans. But through John Perkins' skill and persuasive power, the shaman agreed to come to the restaurant where we were eating that night. And we had taken over the whole restaurant in our hotel. And it was about 10:30, and people were drinking wine and toasting each other, and it was very, kind of celebratory. And nobody noticed that over in the corner by the kitchen door was this guy, the shaman. And he was dressed like a regular person in Guatemala, so he didn't look, strange or anything, but I spotted him. So I went over and stood next to him, and he was checking out the group, just like about the size of this group. I don't know how many people are here, but a little bit smaller than this group. He's checking out, and nobody's noticing him. And nobody noticed that I left the table because everybody was drinking and singing, and it was very much that kind of an evening. And so I stood next to this shaman, and he didn't speak Spanish or Mayan. But he saw a little notepad in my pocket and a pen, and he took it out and he drew a map. And then he wrote midnight in Spanish. And then he went ese, meaning that one. Ese, that one. Ese, that one. Ese, that one. Ese, that one. He picked 13 people. And then he pointed to the map and he said midnight, and then he disappeared. So I thought, what am I going to do? So I went and sat down. I clanked my glass. I said to everybody, there's a slim possibility that some of us, anyone who's interested, could work tonight with a shaman. And we've had a long, long day of looking at all the projects of the Mayan people. And we're going to have a big day tomorrow. We start early, and this would probably be an all-night thing. I'm not sure we can even pull it off, but is there anyone here who would at all be interested in participating in an all-night shamanic ceremony tonight? It would be, at midnight. It's now 10:45, so I don't know if we can pull it off. But if you're at all interested, would you raise your hand? And that one, those people raised their hand. Only those people. And I almost fainted.
Yeah.
Now, John Perkins, this was kind of like, oh, obviously, Lynn. But to me, it was like, holy shit. So I knew that this was a real thing. So we, those 13 people, John and I, we followed the map, we went to this place, the shaman had built a fire. He, through John's good translation, John speaks Spanish, but a little bit of Mayan, somehow was able to communicate to us to lay down with our feet towards this fire and journey, close our eyes and journey. I didn't know really what that meant at that time in 1994. I had never been in a shamanic experience before. But John was kind of guiding us, this shaman was guiding us through John. And so the shaman started drumming and chanting, and it was so hypnotic and so mesmerizing and so mystical. It was light and the fire and the shaman and the singing. And I thought I would fall asleep because I was so exhausted from managing this group, and that I would snore and ruin the whole thing. But I didn't fall asleep. I started to feel like I was in another world, like in an altered, I was in an altered state, I would now say. And I started to feel my arms turn into huge wings, gigantic wings. And I had a wingspan of maybe 12 feet, huge. I became this huge bird, and I felt a beak grow on my face. And I started flying in slow motion, and I began to look down over a vast, unending forest of green. It went forever. And I had acute vision, and I could see down through the canopy all the way to the forest floor. And I could see little critters running around the forest floor, and then I would look out ahead, and the vast, unending, forever forest of green, magnificent experience. And I'm this bird, and I was flying in slow motion, and I don't even know for how long this was going on. And then at a certain point, these disembodied faces of men with orange geometric face paint and yellow, red, and black feather crowns started floating up from the forest floor through the canopy towards me, this bird. And they were calling to the bird in a language that I didn't understand, a kind of plaintive, profound call, mystical call. And I'm in slow motion flying and receiving this call as these faces floated up towards me and then floated back down into the forest and disappeared and then floated back up. And I don't know how long this went on. It could have been an hour, it could have been a minute, but it was like a time stopped. And at a certain point then I heard a real loud drum. And I opened my eyes, I sat up. I was kind of freaked out because I realized I was completely out of it and I was in charge of these people. And I looked around the circle, and everyone looked altered, like something had happened really amazing to them. And so the shaman asked all of us to share, and John did the best he could in translating. And each person had become some sort of an animal, except for one woman who did fall asleep and dream of her grandchildren. Someone became a wolf, another person a snake. And it went around the circle like this until it got to me, and the shaman was directly across from me. And you know when there's a fire, and the fire had burned down now under someone's, you put a candle under your face, you look kind of like a Halloween ghost or something. He looked really scary. And he was right across from me, and I shared the story about the bird, and I told him what I just told you. And he gave this really weird look, like I thought maybe I'd insulted him or said some terrible thing or got translated wrong or something. So I was raised as Catholic, so I'm always guilty, the start guilt. It's always my fault and I'm always sorry. So I was I kind of started there, you know, like, oh God, I screwed this whole thing up. And then it went to the next person, the next person, the next person, and then it got to John Perkins, who was the last one, who was sitting next to him. And John had a very, very similar vision, almost exact, same as mine. And that shaman gave him a real weird look too. And then the shaman completed the ritual, and then asked everyone to leave and stayed with John and I. And
and told us we were being called and that we need to go to these people, whoever they were, that it was not a normal vision. And John, this is his world, so for him that was like normal. For me, it was like, what are you talking about? I am ending world hunger. I need to be in Africa next week. Who are these people? And this was a vision, that's all. But for John, he had just been in Ecuador with the Achuar people just before that. And the Achuar, and he'd been with Ehud Sperling, who some of you know, who's also was an SVN at the time, his publisher. And they had had an encounter in Ecuador in Achuar territory, which is a tribe that had contact by that time for about 60 years. They had contact with the Achuar people, who had had almost no contact. And the Achuar told their Achuar, actually their enemies, but also in many ways their brothers, that they were ready for contact, and they knew it was going to come, that it would come probably in the year 2000. They'd seen it in their dreams and visions. But rather than wait for it to come in a way that they couldn't control, they were going to initiate it with people they could trust, so they would have a relationship with the modern world on their terms, on their timeline, before the contact, which they saw would be dangerous, would come in the year 2000. And John said, this is that. They're calling for contact. They're a dream culture. This is how they communicate. We've got to go. So I said, no way, I can't do that. I don't speak Spanish. I've never been to the Amazon. That's not something I'm working on. You go. He said, no, we're going. So he's a very insistent, wonderful friend, but I had a board meeting for the Hunger Project in Ghana that next week. So we completed this trip of donors in Guatemala, and John flew back actually to Ecuador. I flew to Accra, Ghana. I'm in a meeting in Ghana. You can imagine if you've been in Ghana. People in Ghana are very, very physically beautiful. Their skin is almost blue-black. It's so dark. It's just beautiful people. And I'm in a hotel in Ghana, a French hotel in the capital of Accra, and we're in a conference room, kind of like one of the conference rooms is this hotel, with a table of people, 3 women and 5 men sitting around the table, and I'm the only white person. And it's a board meeting. I'm not the chairman of that board. It's a Ghanaian person, but I'm sitting in. And we're having this wonderful, amazing discussion. And then the men sitting around the table start to have orange geometric face paint appear on their faces, just appear on their faces. And everyone kept talking like this was not happening. It would be like if, Wayne had a banana growing out of his head right now, and no one said anything, and they just kept talking. So I realized no one else is seeing this. I've lost my mind. That weird thing that happened in Guatemala has got me. So what any one of you would have done, I excused myself. I went to the ladies' room, and I got myself together, and I went back in. Everybody was normal. They're still talking. And then in about 5 minutes, it happens again. And I started to cry, because it's kind of my MO. And everybody wanted to know what was wrong. And I said, I think I've just too many planes, too many countries, too much work. I think I'm sick. I need to go home. And they were very gracious. And I went up to my room and packed my bag. This is 1994, so before the internet, before cell phones. I just went straight to the airport and waited for the first plane to Europe or the United States. I got a plane to Frankfurt, and the whole way I saw these faces, whether my eyes were open or shut. Then I flew from Frankfurt to New York, then New York to San Francisco. The whole time I saw these faces. It was horrible, like torture. It sounds exotic, but it was horrible. And when I got home, I kind of told my husband, Bill, but I thought I was crazy, so I didn't really tell him the way I'm telling you. And then it just continued, and I tried to reach John, but I couldn't reach him. He was in the Amazon again. And as you remember, no cell phones. All I could do was voicemail his home phone and send him faxes. So when he came home, there were piles of faxes and voicemails from me about this experience I was having, and could he explain it or make it stop. And when he came back, he affirmed that the Achuar were ready for contact. They were initiating what they most feared, contact, but on their terms, in their territory. They wanted 12 people from the modern world. They wanted 12 people, and their criterion was this. They wanted 12 people with global voice, 12 people with open hearts, 12 people from the modern world who knew that the rainforest was critical for the future of life on Earth, 12 people who would respect indigenous wisdom, and 12 people who would be open to the way of the shaman. And so John said, we gotta go. So I took a leave from the Hunger Project, and we put together a group of people. Most of them were from SVN, and that's why I want to tell you this, because when we thought, who has a global voice? Who has global voice? Who understands how important the rainforest is to the future of life? Who's awake enough to come on this kind of a journey?